The problems that maternal and prenatal health face is a global issue. The developing world especially, where access to care is a major problem. The unanswered questions could in part be solved through having devices that mom could conveniently use from home instead of going to the hospital, to empower moms with information and gain a greater sense of control and peace of mind.
Eric D., founder and CEO of Bloomlife. I love that everyone claps before anything happens. It's awesome. You guys are great. So, Eric, I'm super curious where you grew up.
I grew up in Pennsylvania. I was born in New York City and grew up in eastern Pennsylvania in Allentown.
Yeah, Allentown!
Yeah.
He has no connection to Allentown. We don't know why you just
a small town in eastern Pennsylvania. Yep.
What was your childhood like? What did you spend your time doing?
Childhood was good. Both my parents worked in healthcare. So my dad was he's from the Philippines. He's Chinese, but he was born in the Philippines. My mom was an ER nurse, so they both work in healthcare. Had two sisters, one older, one younger. Spent a lot of my time getting beat up by my older sister, who was always bigger and stronger than me, and then beat up by my mom as well for getting fights with my sister and said, "You don't hit girls." But I had a pretty happy childhood. Always getting into trouble in class because I was often bored. But yes.
What kinds of things were you curious about? What did you kind of find yourself digging into?
I always love tinkering around and building things. I was always a tinkerer. I loved taking things apart. I was a total computer nerd. If my parents actually probably would have known about, like, if I would have been in a different part of the country, I totally would have been like a programmer, because I was introduced to computers when I was probably 10. I was a Tandy 1000, and I was immediately started just taking the whole thing apart and going into config sys and all this programming things in there and just breaking it and then having to figure out how to fix it. I started building my own computer, so I just love that side of figuring things out, and working with my hands. My dad was he was a surgeon, but his father was a carpenter, and so he did a lot of construction at the house. And so even for the most part, he wouldn't let me do anything besides sweep, which was really annoying. When he wasn't around, I would end up taking his tools and building things, and always getting yelled at for not putting the tools back, which I still get yelled at for not putting things back.
What kinds of things would you build?
I don't know. I tried to build a skateboard at one point, and that was a total failure because I was using wheels that had ball bearings, so they would spin around, and building trying to just build ramps for bikes to go off of, and just stupid things like that. Yeah.
Fun.
Wasn't particularly good at it, but I enjoyed doing it.
Cool. So it sounds like both of your parents were in healthcare.
Yep.
Was that something that you kind of knew that was what you wanted to do, or did they influence that?
Yeah. Actually, I was planning on being a doctor, like my father, and he actually suggested I don't become a doctor. I think he was a little bit jaded at the healthcare system at the time when I was in college, and so he was like, "Don't go into healthcare." So I ended up studying biomedical engineering, and so that was kind of the way in. It's all right, if I'm not going to be a doctor, maybe I'll sort of develop the tools and solve problems that healthcare or doctors face. And so I studied bioengineering and biomedical engineering at Cornell, and then I did a PhD at UCLA in biomedical engineering.
Awesome. And what were some of the things that you saw that you thought, I could play a role in influencing this? Kind of before Bloomlife, what kinds of issues?
To be honest, I was a pretty terrible student. I just didn't really apply myself. I don't really think I started applying myself until I was in my 30s. It took me a while to get there. I was a pretty terrible grad student. I moved to LA, and after being in upstate New York for 4 years, you pretty much, when you get to LA, the last thing you want to do is be inside. So I was working on some projects, but I didn't really start applying myself it was probably about 4 years into my PhD, and I was like, I'm never going to get out of here. Oh my God. And then I spent a year and a half cramming the entire PhD into that period of time. So it really wasn't until I got to the company that we sort of spun Bloomlife out of that I really was okay, now I could start doing things. And it was actually, still wasn't even a research role, it was when I started doing business development. And then I was this is my space. Going out, finding companies that are trying to solve some amazing problems, figuring out where the gaps that they might have, and how the company that I was working at was sort of an advanced research institute that was at the intersection of university research and like in industry. So they try to de-risk a lot of like the crazy ideas that university people come up with that will never actually work into things that industry could adopt. And so they're trying to, and talking with people and being around folks, that I sort of found my calling, which is like, finding interesting problems to solve with technology and then finding smarter people than me to go solve them.
What about that nexus drew you in? Was it the environment? Was it the problems? What about?
I love science and technology. Like, I just think that so much of, there's the role that this plays in changing human behavior and society and big crazy problems that we've gotten ourselves into is just fascinating to me. Pushing the knowledge of humankind forward is also something I just think is just this amazing endeavor that we're just always new things to learn. And I don't know, I really loved finding people that were just really trying to figure out some pretty crazy things, and like, how do you make next gen sequencing tools using like newfangled technology, and how do you develop remote patient monitoring tools and address some of the fundamental challenges that these devices have. It's just, I ended up learning, like, becoming quasi knowledgeable in like so many different fields, from advanced imaging technology to wireless communication to like a lot of like just healthcare related technologies. It was just a crash course when I was doing that job.
Cool. When did you, so you said you spun Bloomlife out of that.
Yeah.
At what point did you see that as an opportunity, and when did it become like, okay, we're spinning out?
I've always been interested in starting a business. I actually helped create a one company out of this company, IMEC, called Atlas Neuroengineering, where they're doing implantable neuroprobes for studying like brain activity. So that was like the one thing I got off, but the team was totally dysfunctional. I was like, all right, you guys can't even figure if you want to be in Germany or Belgium, like, doesn't matter. Really, I knew when I found my co-founder, this guy, Julian Penders, who was like amazingly brilliant and probably one of the smartest people working in Wearables right now. We were on a business trip in San Diego, and IMEC, they were really at the forefront of many different fields of technology, and one of them was in mobile health. And his team developed Fitbit years before Fitbit existed. They developed what's a wearable sort of wristwatch. The first one was Basis. They developed that 3 years before they had the iRhythm patch years before they just sucked, because they're Europeans, at like starting businesses. It just wasn't in their culture, and it's just culturally it's not there. And for the most part, it's getting better. And they were too far ahead of corporations, and their entire business model was to sell these ideas into corporations, and most of these guys just weren't ready to figure out what was possible. And so we were over having drinks one night. I was like, why are you still here? Like, why are you here? You have so many businesses with the fundamental technology you created. And he's like, I've just never had someone to do it. I was like, right here, we're doing it. And so we really ideated around for about a year on fundamental thesis that were driving business concepts. And we really got excited about the convergence of consumer medical markets that we were seeing, about the idea of crowdsourced data. And crowdsource anything for that matter, but certainly crowdsource data. When I had an amazing conversation with Esther about her daughter Anne and what she's doing at 23andMe, but just how this is a completely disruptive way of thinking about medical discovery and innovation. And we settled on prenatal. Really was the ideas around fertility, pregnancy, and early life. Just through personal struggles that I was going through, trying to have a baby, seeing my friends having kids, knowing friends that had lost children in pregnancy, and just realizing that this is an area that's so deeply important to people, but where there's so many unanswered questions. And we're like, why is that? And so that's kind of why we started.
Awesome. And so where does like the idea of the wearable and how that could be a solution, at what point were you like, this is so obvious, we have to do this?
We looked at what tools doctors were using. We tried to understand like how they got to be and where the gaps were. We talked to a lot of moms over the questions and concerns that they had over the course of their pregnancy and how that changed. And we felt that a lot of the unanswered questions could in part be solved through having technology in the home, and through having devices that mom could conveniently use from home instead of going to the hospital. And that solved two problems. One is it helped to empower moms with information, gain a greater sense of control and peace of mind. And the other thing it allows you to do is to longitudinally track pregnancies. And that's really kind of like the really big kind of idea, is that if we tracked hundreds of thousands of pregnancies over time and really establish baseline data, can you start to better predict when you might have a problem with the baby, when there might be an impending stillbirth? Can you start to predict when there's an impending preterm birth? And if you had an early warning system, what could you do with that data? Like, how would that change how people care for that mom? How would that change how moms behave, or what decisions she can make? And so this is kind of where the idea of like putting, in part, wearable technology, but amongst other things that we think will eventually come in to the home, put them all together.
Awesome. And so why now? Why does this technology work now? Why haven't we had a solution in the past?
I like to think through all the sort of pounding my head against investors to let them see that women's health is actually a market. And I'm glad to see now that they call it femtech, which is a terrible branding, but I guess it's stuck there. In part, I think technology's kind of caught up. So sensor technology is cheap enough. There is a convergence of the underlying circuits and chips that are in medical devices. The same thing are going to consumer devices now. Certainly mobile connectivity, and the smartphone has a big role to play in that. And there's now like machine learning and artificial intelligence, which has the ability to start crunching all this data. And I think there's a growing sort of interest in consumer health, and again, in women's health. And so hopefully we're contributing some small part to that.
Yeah, I think so. How many moms have you worked with so far?
So we work with a lot of moms, a lot in research, but in the commercial side, we started shipping the product last year, have gotten into the hands of about 5,000 moms so far, probably over 5,000 now, actually probably close to 5,500. Yeah! And through these moms, we've actually now crowdsourced the largest physiological data set in pregnancy by 2 orders of magnitude. So we have about 135,000 hours of longitudinal recordings, which we're now mining for new biomarkers.
Wow. What gets you up in the morning to keep doing this work? Like, what's at the core for you?
Our team is a huge part of it. We've assembled just an amazing group of people that are super passionate about some facet of the business, and just the work that they put in every day. Certainly the moms. It's like every week we get stories from the front lines, from our sort of customer happiness team, of like someone who returned the product because they had a baby and they sent a photo with the product of their new baby, and we get just stories from them of how we've meaningfully changed their pregnancy. And it's not just first-time moms. We've had a 10th time mom who, in one of her earlier pregnancies, things went sideways, and she was looking for better information, and we were able to provide that for her. So it's the moms out there as well.
Cool. Maybe last thing I'll ask you is like paint the vision. Like, what is Bloomlife in the future? What do you want it to be?
So in the future, really the hope is that at the end of every sort of the first prenatal visit that a doctor has with the mom, that he's recommending Bloomlife. And he says this is what we provide to all of our women now. And not just in certain cases of some Facebook and Google employees that get all the best care, but really all moms, and all moms globally. Because the problems that maternal and prenatal health face is a global issue. We have major problems in the US, but those problems certainly extend to the developing world, especially where access to care is a major problem. And so we're hoping to be able to provide solutions into there and save some moms and babies' lives.
Eric, I have like 4 million more questions for you, but your work is so wildly important. Thank you for what you do. Can't wait to see how it scales and grows.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.